If you're visiting us today, just to catch you up on what we've been talking about the last 2 weeks, we've focused our attention on the issue of adoption and taken ourselves through a series that we've called Second Chances, giving a second chance to our child. And last week, the first week, we looked at the fears, some of the myths, and some of the joys of adoption. And then last week, we contrasted our spiritual adoption into God's family with the natural or human adoption that takes place often when we do it through the legal system. Well, today I want to still keep on the theme of adoption, but I want to take a slight twist to this today. And I want us to look at children and pre-teens and teenagers who have parents, who have homes, but in many ways are desperately in need of adoption by the Christian community, which is the church, which is you and I this afternoon. Have you ever stopped to imagine what life is like for a teenager living in 2015? Over the past couple of weeks, I spent some time with some of the teenagers at this church, but also other churches, and also spent some time with our youth pastors and some of our youth workers. And I wanted to find out from them, what are some of the challenges facing our youth today? So I'm going to give you just a snippet of what they shared with me. And as I go through this list, please bear in mind, these are church-going youth who are struggling with some of the challenges that I will be listing out for us. They said that many of them struggle with a sense of identity, just going through a crisis or an identity crisis. But many of them are trying to figure out who they are. They hear many voices calling at them, pushing them, swaying them one way and another. Many of them are struggling with a sense of hopelessness, wondering what this life is about. And they struggle trying to figure out, why are they here? Where are they going? Many of the teenagers today struggle with a sense of low self-esteem, and many of them are going through depression. Talk about the negative impact of electronic media. We live in a time where there is unprecedented and phenomenal advancement in technology. Look at the past 3 decades. Look at the marked social and cultural changes that have taken place in our world, in our continent, in our nation. Many of the TV shows and many of the movies portray foul language, sexual perversion, alcohol, are just normal parts of life. There's a major outcry going on currently and a pushback against the movie 50 Shades of Grey. But you know that even before this movie was released last month, many of our teenagers had read the e-version of that book 1-2 years ago. And there's nothing new out there for them. They only need 50 bob to buy a movie. But why spend 50 bob when they can download these movies completely free from the internet? An average teen or a pre-teen today has access to information that an adult did not have 10, 20 years ago. Our young people face heavy peer pressure at school, at church, and even in our neighborhoods. There's pressure for them to experiment with drugs, with alcohol and other harmful substances. Sexuality is no longer an issue between a girl and a boy. Masturbation is no longer a secret vice. It is talked about openly, it is practiced openly, and celebrated openly among our youth today. You know, cell phones have become a very important accessory for most of our teenagers and even children. And these gadgets, yes, they enable them to interact in their social networking, enable them to play games, which is good, on the cell phones? They said no. They said it gives them access to pornography. Phone sex is easily facilitated by use of their smartphones. The cell phone technology has become a god for the children of this generation today. Our young people are consuming unprecedented amounts of commercially driven media. Media exposure that physically connects our children and our youth to the consumer culture, to the brands, and to the materialistic values upholding the idea that you are what you have. Many of our young children and our young teenagers bemoan the fact that their parents are absent and even uninvolved. Children are looking for attention, and our teenagers will go for attention even if it is bad attention. Many of them are rebelling against their parents' idols, and they listed many idols, and one of the highest ranked idols was work, our careers as parents, the control we want to seek to have over them. Many young people resist correction from their parents because they feel that we do not have the moral right or authority to correct them because our own relationships are not working anyway. You know, last month, right here at XP, the youth team there ran a series on marriage, and they expounded on the fact that marriage is for life until death do us part. And many of the teens sneered and scoffed at that very idea because that is not the reality they live with today. Perhaps because that is not what they see in our homes, and also the movies and the soaps that they watch portray a totally different image of marriage. Right here at XP, some of our teens did not actually know that the Bible directly speaks about marriage being a lifelong commitment. They thought the youth workers had just added that into the whole talk. Many children have become masters of the home theater. And I'm not talking about that big screen in your living room or in your TV room. Our youth leaders explained to me that the home theater means that children have learned how to play their parents. They have learned how to play nice when their parents are at home. How to project a good image, the image that their parents require of them. And yet this same child will act out in a totally different way when they are away from their parents. And that is why many times when parents are called to school or called to meet with the youth workers, they completely will rebel against the fact or the thought that their children would have done the things that they were told the children did. You know, our children and our teenagers especially have daily access to money and stuff that an average family in Kibera does not have in a week, even in a month. But our children have it daily. You know, our youth leaders are continually surprised by how much cash some of our young people carry on them on a daily or maybe, let me say, weekly basis. They told me of one instance where the teens pulled out their wallets and paid Pesa Taslimu cash, 6,000 bob, for an event they had not been aware of, but they just walked in, found it being publicized, and figured out or found out their friends were going. They didn't need to run to ask for money from their parents. They already had it in their wallets. And that 6,000 shillings was just part of loose change from part of their monthly stipends. You know, after the first service, one of the teenagers who was sitting here came up to me and said, you know, it's true. On a normal month, I have at least 8,000 plus bob that I can save up. And I said, how do you do that? And he said he gets a weekly stipend of about 1,000 or 2,000 shillings. He already has school transport. He has meals at school. He has everything. This is just for incidentals. And so if there's an event coming, because a lot of these events are publicized in advance, they are able to stock up and to save huge amounts of money. And this young guy told me after the first service, you know, when we go for our events, we actually spend more than you adults. They have a lot of money on them. And with this kind of easy money, our children are able to access almost anything they want. If you're a parent of a teen, I hope you know what goes on in the malls, and that you know it is not as innocent as it looks. Our malls have become a very safe recruitment avenue or venue for our children. It is where they get to know what is happening in town that weekend or that week. It is where they are oriented into life on the first lane as teenagers. If you're a parent or a guardian of a preteen or a teenager this morning or this afternoon, I hope you've heard of daylight insomnia. And I hope you are curious enough to find out what that is. Masaku 7's candle, okay? And if you don't, go on to YouTube and just look out for daylight insomnia, and specifically version 3 or season 3. In that specific one that took place at Splash, there were about 200 kids. When several youth pastors sat to watch this clip, they were able to identify almost a third to a half of those children as children who actually come to our churches. These were church-going youth. Some of those two DJs on spinning the thing, those are kids from, I won't even tell you the church. And the youth pastors were in shock and in horror watching, you know, the things, the way the kids were dressed, my dress, my choice candle, you know, the things that they were doing, girls kissing girls, you know, just a lot of stuff, very bad stuff that was going on in daylight. And the kids are very aware that all this is being taped, or it's being, what's the word? Videoed. Is that a word? Recorded, all right? And they know it, and they know it's going to be on YouTube, and they would care less. You know, some of our schools are no longer an oasis for our children. Children have to daily contend with the overly competitive nature of our education system. The playing field is becoming more uneven as the years go by. You know, I wonder how many parents really look critically at the curriculum and some of the subjects that our children have to take. One of my greatest shockers this past week was sitting with a group of teenagers, and one of them told me about their school. And there's this subject, which I'm sure some of your children take, but it's called social ethics. And the children are taught their rights, and they're taught to know what the role of the parent is, and how the parents are required to play that role. They are taught who to call in the event that there is parental or social abuse. And then this girl went on to tell me that in their school, they are actually taught and coached on how to write a letter to sue their parents, and how to write a letter when they feel that their parents are not rising up to their role, and a letter that can demand that they are removed from that home and legally allowed to have other parents adopt them in our courts. They are taken for field studies where they go to the children's courts, you know what we were talking about last week, and it is simulated for them. You would stand here and your parents would stand here, and this is what the judge will ask you, and they go through it in the event that that child would seek to have other parents apart from their own parents. In another school, in the same social ethics class, the children are taught sex education, and part of that sex education, they are taught how to use sex toys. And this is not high school. We are talking primary. schools. These are just some of the few issues that our children have to contend with today. Again, bear in mind that a lot of the kids and the teens I talk to are church-going teens. This is happening to them. Many of them are engaged in some of the things that I've shared with you today. You see, the enemy comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And when you look at the lives of our preteens and our teenagers, you will see his handiwork right there upon them. Satan has stolen the innocence of our children and youth. He has stolen their sense of worth. He has stolen the protective cover that has been there for generations over our children. And he continues to steal with the ultimate aim to destroy and to kill this generation. And in many ways, we have a generation that is seemingly forgotten. A generation with parents, with homes, but a generation of orphans, of destitute. Children who are crying out that the body of Christ would come alongside them and be the very family that would adopt them and walk life with them. Many of us see the issues that our youth face, and maybe even as I shared in my introduction, it is not new to you. But then many of us somehow do not engage and do not become a part of the solution that is desperately needed today. I asked several adults, and I asked, why are you not engaged, even though you can see these things happening? For some people, maybe it was just a fast, and maybe sitting here this morning, you never considered that you have any role to play in the lives of young people. And your assumption is that that role is only to be played by parents and by youth pastors and maybe by teachers. That you've never considered being personally engaged in our children and even in our youth ministry. That maybe you think you're not needed there. You look at Quest, you look at XP, you look at the camp that Andy was talking about, and you don't see that you are needed there. That it would make such a difference if you took a week of leave to come alongside our Quest team and be a helper and be a friend and be there for those children that week. For other people, they are not engaged, they told me, because of fear. They said, I don't know how to talk to the youth. What if they don't like me? I don't think I'm cool enough. Others told me they do not engage because they are afraid to fail. Others among us said they are too busy. And others just wouldn't be bothered. We are busy with other things, with our families, with our careers, with our own evening schools, and we just cannot find the time to engage meaningfully with this generation that indeed is in bondage. Some of us look down upon ourselves and we feel that we are incapable. Maybe because of something that happened in our past. Maybe we messed up in our youth and we feel that we are not worthy to be involved in the lives of other young people. Some of us compare ourselves with others. You look at Pastor Nick on his bike, you look at Pastor Christian and you think, I won't even try. Many excuses, many reasons for our lack of engagement with our young people. And left to ourselves, will only be spectators as the enemy continues to destroy this young generation. But God did not call us into his family to be spectators. When you look at the book of Exodus, God gives an account of a generation of people who are oppressed, people who are under bondage. The children of Israel faced many challenges and they suffered greatly under their Egyptian masters. When you look at Exodus chapter 3, you find Moses, on the other hand, simply minding his business, tending the flock of his father-in-law, until God appeared to him in the flames of fire and spoke to him from the burning bush. Exodus chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5, you find Moses giving God a stream of excuses why he would not be involved in helping to set the children of Israel free. God had chosen Moses, but Moses was right here in the comfort. I don't know how comfortable it was in the desert, but he was right in there. Look at Exodus chapter 3, and we'll read from verse 4 to verse 10. When the Lord saw that Moses had gone over to look at the burning bush, God called and said to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." Verse 5, "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." And then God said to him, "I am God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And God said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have had them crying out because of the slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. And therefore, I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land and into a good and a spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, Moses, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." And what is Moses' response? Look at verse 11. His first comment, "Who am I? How can I go before Pharaoh?" Do you recognize that excuse from the list that we shared before? Moses is looking down upon himself. Maybe he's afraid. Remember what he had done before this? He had killed a man in Egypt, and he was now a fugitive in the desert. And when he asks God, "Who am I?" God does not respond to him in the way that we would expect. Look at God's response in verse 12. God said to Moses, "I will be with you." In a sense, drawing Moses' attention from himself and pulling that attention to God himself, who was sending him to accomplish this task. Verse 13, Moses says to God, "Now suppose, I haven't said yes, Lord, but suppose I go. Who will I say sent me?" And verse 14, God said, "I am that I am. And Moses, I have chosen you to set my people free." Chapter 4, verse 1. "But Lord, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me?" And God goes ahead and says to Moses, "What is it you have in your hand?" And he shows him a couple of tricks that Moses could use with that staff. And he's able to turn it into a snake. Then he says, "Put your hand, your healthy hand, within your cloak." And when Moses removes it, it is leprous. And then he says, "Put it back and bring it out," and it is whole again. And God says, if they don't believe those two moves, then why don't you take some water from the Nile? It will turn to blood. Now, Moses, go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. And after this, you'd expect that Moses would be ready to go, but no, he's not done with his excuses. In chapter 4, verse 10, Moses says, "But Lord, I am not eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to me, your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." And the Lord said to Moses, "It is I who gave you your mouth. I will help you to speak, and I will teach you what to say." Verse 13 of chapter 4. "Oh Lord, Please send someone else, Moses says. I just want to be a spectator. Can you believe that? After all that God had assured him of, after all that God had said, he's still afraid, unwilling to go. And this final response angers God, who pairs him off with his brother Aaron and sends them off to Pharaoh. You know, when you look at this account of the calling and commissioning of Moses, I want us to pull out two lessons for us this morning or this afternoon as we think about our young people, as we think about the role that we must play as we adopt them. It might not be legally, but as we give them the chance that they so desperately need to make it and to reach the destiny that God has for them. And the first lesson for us this afternoon is this, that God uses ordinary people. It was true in the Old Testament, it was true in the New Testament, and it continues to be true even today. Remember the calling of the 12 disciples in Luke chapter 6. Jesus prayed all through the night before he chose his disciples. But when you look at those disciples, and when you look at the things that they did, there's nothing that distinguished them at the calling point of their lives. The majority of them were uneducated peasants from Galilee. When Jesus looked at them, it was not their qualifications that drew him to them. In fact, you could argue that he picked them because they were not qualified. And he knew that in his hands, he could direct them and shape them in the way that he wanted. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. Paul reminds us even this afternoon, my brothers and my sisters, think of what you are when you are called. Not many of you are wise by human standards. Not many of you were influential. Not many of you were from noble birth. But God, he chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of this world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world to despise the things and the things that are not, and to nullify the things that are, so that none of us could ever boast before him. God uses ordinary people, and we therefore need to overcome our fears, we need to overcome our insecurities, and we need to rise up to the occasion and to be God's handiwork and to be God's hands to do the work that needs to be done on behalf of this generation. You see, God knows our limitations. He knows your limitations. He knows my limitations. Nothing is hidden before him. He knows everything full well, and yet he still chooses us. And he's calling us to do something about this generation of our young people. You know, many of the young boys and the many teens among us are crying for somebody to walk with them. Even though many times they project a macho image, deep inside they're just children. Children who are lost. Children who are crying out for help. Look at some of the movies they gravitate towards. Movies like Batman. Movies like the Twilight series, where there's always a mentor. Somebody who's there to pull you out and to bring you safely to shore. Many of our young girls are crying for a father figure who's safe, who's loving, who's authentic. Now here's something very important. If you're a parent of a teen, do you know that the teens actually don't think you are that cool? At many points in their life, you're not cool enough. And at many points in their life, it is the parent of another teen or another adult who looks cool enough to hang around them. This is a fact of research, that non-parental adults often have more impact in the life of a young person than the parents will ever have. It's a fact. Non-parental adults will often have more impact in the lives of a younger person than the parents of that young person might ever have in their lives. Ordinary people. Think about your own life. Yes, your parents laid the foundation, but there are many people who came alongside you in the defining moments of your life. People who are able to guide you, people who are able to confront you, people who are able to show you the way to go. You know, I was talking to Pastor Christian this week. He's our youth pastor at Quest. And he shared this publicly, so I don't think I'm betraying any confidence here. But he told me that he had actually chosen the path of rebellion in his youth, and that he did everything possible to rebel against his parents and any structure that was set around him. But one man at Nairobi Baptist Church, Pinto Kali, saw something in Christian, believed in him, confronted him, challenged him, held his hand, and began to walk life with him. Helped him see that he could make it in his studies. And this morning, as you and I are seated here, Christian is a youth pastor ministering this morning at XP because Pinto Kali came alongside him and walked with him. At Mavuno Church, the youth pastor there, his name is Frank, and Frank shared with me how his family hit some financial challenges, and somehow things just did not hold together, and they were all moved up country, and they struggled, and somehow a young adult relative who had just gotten married decided to come and to pull Frank out of all that was going on at that time. And they brought Frank into their family and involved him in everything that they did. And when their friends came in, they engaged Frank in conversation. And Frank told me, you know, when my friends were out there rebelling, there was so much going on in my life. These friends, my cousins, had really broadened my perspective of life. I just didn't have time to mess up. And Frank today is ministering as a youth pastor in Mavuno because a relative decided to do something and adopt him, even though it was not in the legal sense. You know, I look at my own life, and there are people who've done an amazing work in my life. As a young child, I shared with you last week, you know, my Auntie Tess has been such a pillar, somebody I could run to. Even though she's my mom's sister, I felt there was a connection. Somebody I could have fun with, somebody I could go and vent with when I was having issues in my life. And I always knew that she would keep in confidence the things that we shared. I remember going to Form 1, and my uncle, my mom's brother, his name is Bram, and Bram began to speak into my life. And at that point, he had just made it to campus. It was a big thing in our family. And as a young child, you know, he was such a role model. He was not a believer. But for me, I thought, this guy is in campus. That's my goal. One day, I want to be in the University of Nairobi. Now, those were the days when University of Nairobi was the university. It's not like now we have so many. Those days, if you made it to the University of Nairobi, everybody kind of took a bow. And I really wanted to be like my uncle. And he was not really physically there, but I remember when I went to Form 1, he sent me a letter. And he told me, you know, start reading, read good novels. It will help your English. And he told me when I was in Form 1, remember Famous 5, those any Bleaton things? He told me he read 50. And somehow I decided I will read 100. And he kept telling me, you know, do this, do that. And it was just letters. And I still have them even today. And he was guiding me, even though he didn't know it. And then I got to uni. And before university, right there in Form 1 or Form 2, something happens in Form 2, and the rebel in us rises up. And somehow I began to gravitate towards a company of friends that was not really good. And an English teacher, Mr. Wanyaki Mahaini, I don't know what he saw in me, But I remember he called me to the staff room, and in front of all those teachers told me, Janet, if you continue with that group of girls, you will not make it past Form 4. I want you to go back to the friends you had in Form 1. And then he threatened me and told me, I know your father, and I know where he works. So I will tell him what you were doing. And then when I got to uni, Pastor Oscar was sent to, start the work or to continue the work or to revamp the work at Nairobi Chapel. I had never seen Christian marriage practiced because my parents were not believers at that time. And in those days, the Nairobi Chapel members were generous to the youth. Most Saturdays and Sundays, there was always a list of, and you could sign up to have lunch at a member's house. And of course, as university students, free lunch. So we'd always sign up and we'd go for a time of lunch and we'd have games up till about 5, then we'd take the bus and go back to uni. And it was in those moments or episodes that I began to observe Christian marriage at work. On and on. The women of Nairobi Chapel in those days had something they called the Dadas ministry, all right? Dada with a Z, that oomph at the end. And we had forums on Saturday morning where they just bring a cake and a flask of tea and would sit and talk about issues we were struggling with. Would have forums where we'd spend the night, nothing expensive, all in homes. And it was there where we were trained and taught how to live lives as women, even in the struggles that we faced. And on and on. And as I share my examples, I'm sure you can see men and women who are there for you, a teacher, a neighbor, a friend, an older sibling. And when you look at your life today, yes, our parents laid a foundation, but there were others who came alongside and strengthened that foundation. I don't know if you're feeling ordinary this afternoon. That's good, because God uses ordinary people. And he wants to make a difference in this generation using you and I. And then secondly, God uses ordinary things. Some may not be engaged in the lives of young people around us, whether in families, whether in our church, whether in our neighborhood, because you feel you don't have anything much to offer. But remember, little becomes much when you put it in the master's hands. Like the little boy who gave Jesus his fish and his bread, and Jesus was able to multiply it and feed thousands of people. In Exodus chapter 4 verse 2, the Lord said to Moses, "What is that in your hand?" And Moses was holding a staff, a shepherd's staff or a stick. And God said to Moses, "Take that staff in your hand, and with it you will perform miraculous signs." It is the same staff that was turned into a snake. It is with this staff that Moses struck the Nile and it turned into blood. It is with this staff that Moses raised his staff before the Red Sea and it parted, and the children of Israel were able to cross. An ordinary stick, a shepherd's staff, and yet he was able to perform amazing things with it. God uses ordinary things. And each one of us seated here this morning has something ordinary at our disposal, however small, however insignificant. And this morning or this afternoon, God is asking each one of us, what is that in your hand? For some of us, what you have in your hand could be the gifts that God has given you. Maybe you're a teacher, and you could use that gift for so much good on behalf of this generation. I had a lady, a sister moved into a new estate, and this lady noticed there were many young kids just hanging around after school. And because she's a teacher, she befriended their parents and then began to invite these children into her house in the evening. And she'd help them catch up with their homework. She'd give them extra help that they needed. And then for 5 minutes at the end, she would read them a Bible story and pray for them and then send them back home, Monday to Friday. And you know what she was doing, or what she has done? She has essentially brought the church to her neighborhood. What you have in your hand, it could be your children. Your children have friends. Have you really taken time to understand your children's friends? That you might find there's some who do not come from a stable home. There's some whose parents do not help them spiritually. Could you adopt these children and maybe begin by bringing them with you to church on Sunday? As a father, could you adopt your son's friend? Show him what it means to be a man. What you have in your hands. It could be your house. You know, a young couple just moved into a new estate, and the young man was really just complaining about some of the teens just hung around their front window. There's a ledge out there. And every Friday and Saturday evening, they just hung around there. And he says, they just idle around my window. And I thought, what an opportunity to get to know them. And maybe just once a month, invite them in for a movie. Get to know their parents so that their parents know where they're going. Invite them in for a movie. You don't need to do something expensive. Just buy squash, right? And just invite them in. And it will amaze you how they'll begin to open up an opportunity to make a difference. For some of us, what we have in our hands are our hobbies, maybe sports, and things that we enjoy, things that energize us. And God wants us, God always wants us to enjoy our service for Him. He wants us to use the things that we enjoy. I don't know if you've watched this clip on TV. It's run a couple of times and there are different versions to it. But this is what some of the young people are doing in Korogosho with what they have in their hands.
In slums, young people are usually ignored in the planning process of their communities, and in most cases, children always find themselves with no playing grounds. Seeing this, a Korogocho youth group called Hope Raisers came out to one of their busiest streets to teach the community the importance of the streets and how they can share the little they have.
It's an activity within the skating. It's called roll ball. We are doing it informally, just showing their skill in roll ball.
Despite the unplanned construction and lack of space for the youths, they can still come up with games and sports that fit their environments, and that is why Hope Raisers introduced street skating.
So, venye tulipata barabara na tukaona tunaweza introduce something new kupatia watoi na wase wa young an alternative sport.
Niko hapa kujiunga na marafiki wangu. Tumekuja hapa sasa kama leo kuenjoy na kuwa pamoja kama watu wa coach. Sasa leo tumekuja kuskate.
The organization started in 2007. We were a group of musicians, and we thought we wanted to engage more young people. So we thought the best way we could do that was through starting a sport program. So we started the skating program.
Kwa challenge kubwa sana kushare street na wasa motorbike. Round last year kuna mtoi alibondwa na pikipiki, ilikuwa issue bigi. Kasa hiyo wameanza kuaccept hii street ni ya skaters. Saturday na Sunday wanatuallow.
It's nothing much, but it's what they have in their hands. You know, these kids look very innocent. They had an opportunity to walk through Korogosho And I had a young man with me, and he told me, Pastor, if I was not with you, you would not have passed through the street. And I said, why? He said, those kids, they actually have knives. And those kids could strip you of everything that you have, as innocent as they look. And if you follow this clip on YouTube, you'll see many stories of kids whose lives have changed because they joined this skating group. Many kids who otherwise would have completely lost this chance for life, but because somebody stepped out with the little they have, these kids have a second chance. What you have in your hands, it could be time, and not much time. Maybe you're able to come for 9 o'clock service, and then go to XP for the 11 o'clock. And the youth pastors there are saying, please send us more adults. Not to come and teach, not to do anything strenuous. We just want them to come and be friends among us. Sit in the service, get to know one young person, get to hear what people are going through. What you have in your hands, it could be your gift of prayer. Adopt a school, adopt a youth group. Get to know what their issues are and pray them in love through your prayers. What you have in your hands, it could very well be your past mistakes and your failures. That you tried the road to drugs and premarital sex or whatever it was, and that you are living with those consequences. And in coming out and speaking candidly about some of those issues, many young people will take a complete U-turn and choose to walk different. Then maybe your voice would be the loudest guiding voice, stronger than the parent's voice. Because when a parent says stop, they think the parent is nagging. But when a youth pastor says stop, they think the youth pastor is naive. But you can speak from experience and say, I've walked there. Do not even dare go that way. You know, I don't know about you, but there are many times when I felt inadequate. And I remember going through a season at one point, and there was something happening, and I felt I can't confront this, and I can't deal with this pastor. I remember coming to Pastor B, and I said, why don't you, you're older, Pastor B, you have more authority, go and talk to this person. And I remember she asked me, Janet, if you saw a snake right now, will you stop and then begin looking for a nice, smooth, polished, painted stick to kill the snake? I said, no. She said, what will you do? I said, I'll just grab whatever stick, whatever is there, and kill that snake, even if it is a crooked stick. And she told me, never forget this in life. Even a crooked stick can kill a snake. You see, when ordinary people allow God to use them and to use the ordinary things that they have, God is able to do the extraordinary. We have a generation among us. Yes, they have parents. Yes, they have homes. Some of them great schools. But when you look at what the enemy is doing, these are orphans. These are kids who are destitute, abandoned, and crying out for a second chance. And I pray that as you listen and as you continue to reflect on what we've shared this month, that this will be like a burning bush that will draw you closer, and that you'll hear God's voice saying, I am sending you to go and to set my people free. I am sending you as an individual. I'm sending you as a congregation to look at the plight of the children, to look at the plight of our preteens and our teenagers who are in bondage, and to bring my people into the land, the good land that I have in store for them. I pray that for each one of us seated here this afternoon, there will be someone one day who will speak and put your name in a sentence, as I did those that I mentioned in my life. That so and so came alongside me. Yes, my parents were there. And yes, my parents loved me. But there was something more about this person that drew me and helped me to walk life in a way that now has caused me to stand established and firm in the destiny that God has for me. I pray that each of us will choose just one. Just one. You don't need to legally adopt them. Choose one. It could be a relative. It could be a child in your neighborhood. It could be maybe a workmate keeps talking about their problem child, and there's something calling to you about that child. It could be the teens here at church, whatever. But that each one of us would reach one and walk through this life with one. I pray that when God looks at this generation seated here, who would be found faithful, that we handed the baton in such a way that the coming generation was able to stand, and in their time, that they too will hand that baton, giving a second chance to the coming generation. Let me ask us to stand as we come to a close of our service this afternoon. And if there's a name or a face of a child or a teen that God has impressed on your heart, please go and do something about it. God will show you what you need to do. You don't need to read books. You don't need to know it all. One step at a time, it will make a difference. Our Father, we thank you for this afternoon, and we thank you for your word to us. We thank you for opening our eyes again to see your call upon us as the older generation, and to look at many coming behind us who are faced with challenges that we ourselves did not need to face, who are faced with issues that continue to spin them out of control. I pray, Lord, that we would not just mind our own business and be comfortable to be spectators and even be experts about what the youth do and to point fingers at them. I pray that we'll be the responsible generation that will look back and seek to give a second chance to a child in need of a home, to a child in need of foster care, to a child maybe who needs legal adoption, but even this morning, to our young people who are out there and need somebody to hold their hand and to walk through life with them. Father, equip us with everything good to doing your will. And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forevermore. Amen. God bless you. Have an amazing, amazing